there. And at this time, I would like to acknowledge and confirm with Sandy, we do not have anyone who is registered to speak, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so let's move on to our policy development. And Sandy, I'm gonna turn it over to you to talk about the equity policy development that CDTC is gonna be doing.
Thanks, Mayor. And actually, right before that, we're going to have a brief presentation on the Cdtc Jobs Access Report. Rima Shamia is the principal author. This is a project that began 2 to 3 years ago, to be honest with you, under Mike Mancini's leadership here. And we just recently completed the report. Rima's on vacation this week, but we thought this was an important topic because it ties into the next agenda item related to equity. But we did this research and had some interesting findings on the relationship between transportation, where low wage jobs are located, and where low wage earners live. So we're going to show a short video that reviews the findings of the report, and we will have some discussion about that afterwards. So let me get this going. Technology tricks. Sharing. Practice this, I'm telling you. No problem. Thank you. Sorry about the mouse. It's not showing us here. We're not using this one. Minimize that. This is Dan Lara, our IT specialist.
Hello, going.
Okay, thank you. Yep, thank you very much. All right, let's try this again. Sure.
Policymakers and service providers regarding inequities that they were seeing in our transportation system and how those inequities impact job access. People's access to jobs today is impacted by how our region has developed over time. From 1950, our cities were where our region's population was concentrated. Since then, growth has been almost entirely in the suburban and rural areas of the 4 counties, resulting in sprawling development with little population growth. The graph and the map show essentially the same information, just in 2 different ways. In the graph, you can see the slow, steady rate of growth over time and how the suburbs drove that growth beginning in 1950. The map shows the concentration of older housing development in the cities in red. Here's Schenectady, Albany, and Troy. And the newer housing in the suburbs, which is in green and blue. Poverty is not distributed evenly. More people of color experience poverty than white people. 37% of Black or African Americans in our region experience poverty, 32% of Hispanic or Latinos, but only 12% of white people in our region experience it. More residents of color in poverty live in the cities of Schenectady, Albany, or Troy than white people. So 88% of Black or African Americans, 76% of Hispanic or Latinos, but only 38% of whites in poverty live in those cities. And then about 12% of Capital Region's workers are in poverty, even though they draw a paycheck. Job locations shift over time. We looked at two job sectors, retail and hospitality. The retail sector grew by 10% regionally between 2002 and 2015, but it actually shrank within our three main cities of Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. And then in the hospitality sector, which includes hotels and restaurants, that sector grew as well, and it was robust in the cities of Schenectady and Troy, but it actually shrank in the city of Albany. So some low-wage jobs were trending away from those three largest cities in that time frame. So there's a lot of bars on this graph, but the takeaway point is really that older housing costs less. And as we saw on a previous map, older housing is concentrated in our three main cities of Schenectady, Albany, and Troy, right here. And low middle income people are more likely to afford rental housing, which, as we can see on this map, is concentrated in the cities and the inner ring suburbs, which on this map is shown in red and in this orange color. Bus riders are more likely to be people of color and in poverty. So looking at the share of commuters who take public transportation by race, for example, 26% of people of color in the city of Albany commute by bus, while only 6% of white people do. And looking at the share in poverty by mode of travel to work, 21% of bus riders in the city of Albany are in poverty, while only 11% of drive-alone commuters are. Bus commutes take longer than car commutes. It's kind of intuitively we already know this, but here are the numbers. This graph shows the share of public transit commuters with a commute of an hour or more. So for example, Albany County commuters who travel by bus, 13% of them have a bus commute of an hour or more. People who commute by bus in the city of Schenectady, 23% have a bus commute of an hour or more. Here's a different statistic, just for example, in the city, in the county of Rensselaer, the average drive-alone car commuter has a commute of an average commute of 24 minutes, but a transit rider has an average commute of 49 minutes, which is more than 2 times longer. So just to recap, people of color and people experiencing poverty largely live in Albany, Schenectady, and Troy, and that's where the oldest and the most rental housing is concentrated. Some low-wage jobs like the retail and hospitality sectors are moving outside of the core cities, and this can be connected to sprawl because sprawl is not only the sprawling of residential properties, but also of commercial activity and economic activity. A larger share of bus commuters are people of color compared to drive-alone commuters, and more bus commuters are in poverty compared to drive-alone commuters, and bus commutes take a lot longer. So this is where land use comes in. We're seeing a housing to jobs mismatch. Affordable housing is concentrated in the cities, but many low-wage jobs aren't in the cities. And data show that low-income workers are more likely to use the bus, which is less efficient than driving. This slide tries to give you some idea of the scale of the mismatch that we're looking at in some of our regional job centers. This green bubble here represents the number of low-wage jobs in Saratoga Springs, while the blue bubble represents the number of working folks who live within the city of Saratoga Springs who work a low-wage job. There's about twice as many jobs as there are people living in the town that work those jobs. The rest of the jobs are filled by people who commute into the city from somewhere else. A similar dynamic is present in the town of Guilderland, but the scale is different. Instead of having about 2 low-wage jobs for every 1 low-income working resident, it's about 1.4. So that's just this 4,198 divided by 3,063 gives us that ratio. Here's another way to think about the house jobs mismatch and the role of land use. This table shows the ratio of jobs to working residents for low, middle, and high income categories for some capital region municipalities. A ratio of more than 1 means more workers commute into the community than live there. That's just the ratio that we just calculated with our green bubble and our blue bubble. The ratio of more than 1 means that more workers commute into the community than live there. A ratio of less than 1 means that more working residents leave their community for work than stay local. Here's a ratio of more than 1, and here's a ratio of less than 1. Okay? The numbers in red suggest that housing that is affordable to low or middle income workers who work in those communities is limited, but more expensive housing is less limited or not limited at all. In other words, for whatever reason, some communities have plenty of housing for high income workers in their communities, but not enough for low income workers in their communities. One way that municipalities with significant job centers can influence housing supply is through land use policy. We compared 4 pairs of historic and current zoning policies to look at how they changed over time and whether they became more or less friendly towards affordable housing over time. The historic zoning codes and maps we obtained were adopted between 1955 and 1986 and were compared to their most recent iteration adopted sometime between 2008 and 2021. We analyzed the zoning codes to just look at where the different types of housing were allowed and then created the maps based on that data. We had 4 mapping pairs, but in this presentation we're only just showing you 2 pairs. So the blue areas represent areas where only single-family housing is allowed under the zoning code. The green areas show where 2-family housing is allowed, and the red areas show where multifamily housing is allowed. Black is where general population housing is prohibited under the zoning code. Specialty residential development like senior housing and community housing are included in the black category because they're limited to a subset of the population only. So overall, black areas expanded, meaning that the total area that allowed housing shrank. Areas that allowed 2-family housing shrank the most, while areas allowing single-family housing expanded the most. Outcomes related to areas that allowed multifamily housing were more varied. In one community, that red area shrank significantly, while it saw small gains in the other 3. For example, in these 2 mapping pairs, the red areas show modest gains. For example, in this area here, you can see there was an increase. However, some multifamily zones share space with other high-demand uses such as retail, commercial, and office uses that can make it more difficult or expensive to build affordable housing. And on the other hand, many areas that allow single-family housing, like this big expanse, limit other high-demand uses, which reduces competition for space in those areas, making it easier to build single-family housing. The report included the following recommendations for Cdtc, local governments, and transportation providers. For Cdtc, the recommendations are to share the report with local land use policymakers, the business community, nonprofits, vocational trainers, to partner with businesses to develop transportation demand management plans, to work with others to find transportation solutions to hard-to-reach job centers such as warehouses and distribution centers, and to work with others to develop boilerplate business plans for microtransit industries catering to employers. Recommendations for local governments are to conduct a build-out analysis that considers projected housing development and projected job growth to determine if there's parity between jobs available and housing available for workers in the low, medium, middle, and high income categories. To incentivize co-location of affordable housing with low-income jobs, encourage the location of affordable housing within easy bus, and to encourage the location of affordable housing within easy bus, walk, and bike access to low-wage jobs. And when planning for the future, to engage the community's workforce as well as residents in public outreach. Recommendations for transportation providers include collecting and publishing measures of equitable access to their systems, and to use those measures to adjust services to improve access. I also had a couple of items identified for future research. Conduct a network analysis to look at job accessibility from low, middle, and high income neighborhoods. Investigate impacts of reinvestment on low income tenants in city neighborhoods. Consider the role of transportation in regional workforce development, and specifically address the transit driver shortage. And that concludes the presentation. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions or comments, you are more than welcome to direct them to me. My email address and phone number are up on the slide. Alternatively, Karen Ward is in the meeting today, and she is also available to field your questions. Thank you.
For your attention. We did this research project as an outgrowth of our equity advisory committee, and they wanted to put some factual information based on census data and other data sources to kind of highlight this issue. It's a building block to our update of our long-range plan that we'll be embarking on in the coming years. And in addition to that, as you all know, being a federally funded organization, the current federal leadership has made equity a pretty high priority, not only in terms of how federal dollars are to be spent, but in terms of how we think about it here as a region. So this research we intend to share with the public. We're bringing it to you first. We've shared and vetted this paper with many of you and many of your staff members, I should say, over the last 6 months or so. We've gotten some good feedback on it, and I'm looking to identify next steps. Does anyone have any questions? Carrie is listening in, and she might be able to answer any questions you might have. Okay. No questions from anyone here in the room. Anyone online?
I just have a comment from a regional planning perspective. The proposition of planning is to understand who we are as a people and how should we live. The proposition of regional planning is understanding the interplay between where people live, where people work, and how people satisfy their basic goods and need for services. And I think there's a consensus generally that from a workforce perspective, we want to move people towards opportunities for better employment and higher wage earning rather than relying on government support. So this analysis really underscores the need for and will help in future planning for workforce investments, transit planning to connect people who are making lower wages now with better opportunities in the future, and how to address where low wage jobs earners can live, perhaps more closely to where those job opportunities are located. So from the Regional Planning Council's perspective, we applaud this work and we think it's very valuable for the region.
Thank you, Mark. Okay. Mayor Sheehan already introduced the next topic, which was the equity policy development. So let me pull up that document. I keep forgetting to slide it over to the other screen. Technology at its finest. There we go. Okay. So this paper that was included in the packet online, discussed possible proposal for your consideration on developing an equity policy for CDTC. As I said at the beginning, and in order to access a lot of the federal grants that are out there, if the grant program doesn't explicitly include an equity consideration, it probably has it in the evaluation criteria. And that equity can be described in many different ways. And one of the things that we wanted to look at in this proposal was how CDTC can work with staff, can work with you folks, policy board, and our planning committee, as well as our equity advisory committee, and the development of an MPO-based equity policy. This can range to, what we're thinking about is creating a resolution that can include many elements. Some examples are shown here. So some basic things are ensuring that equity is just a regional goal and that we're making progress toward the goal as measured through our planning work. We could include more robust representation from communities of color on our boards and committees and our staff as well. We could review our policy and programs to ensure equitable funding is sent toward disinvested communities and jobs access, address needs of historically disadvantaged populations in the transportation planning and project selection process through different analyses, and providing additional support and defining the role of CDTC's equity advisory committee. So we wanted to see what your thoughts were on pursuing this. We'd be looking for a motion today to actually authorize the staff and the planning committee and the equity advisory committee to develop something for your consideration in December. So we wanted to see what your thoughts were. Open the floor to any discussion. Silence.
This is something in-house staff can handle, or is this you go out to another? Okay.
Yeah. We have a number of examples from other MPOs that have accomplished this, and there's a wide range of approaches, but they've all managed to accomplish this in-house.
Is there any additional funding you see coming down the pike for this type of program, or this, if the determination is that funding needs to go into different areas, then do we determine who we take that from out of the pie that already has it?
Yeah, I think that the recent passage of the Inflation Reduction Act has a new funding program in it that really targets some of these disadvantaged communities. So I think there are opportunities for more programs like that coming out of the administration. How long that continues, we'll see.
That's like when our friends right here always say, try to explain to me that there's programs that a city or a village can take money from, but then there's other ones that you can't. So if there's set asides for this, that the rest of the towns and cities can't take from anyways, then it would seem to be a no-brainer.
Yeah, most of the programs that I've seen thus far are discretionary, meaning you have to apply. But by us having and developing some sort of a policy, it will help the potential applicant and strengthen those applications with the MPO support. There's no other conversation here in the room.
Great. So we just need a motion to proceed with formulating an equity plan for CDTC.
I'll make a motion.
Pat Jordan made the initial motion,
I'll second it.
and Tom Warner made the second motion.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So that motion is carried. And hopefully I'm reading my agenda right, and not skipping ahead this time. I believe that we are at the tip amendments, and I'm going to hand it over to Carm.
You're gonna do the first two that are yours, two CDTA amendments, sorry.
Most of you are used to this, you know, it's something that, things that happened the last several months. These are two discretionary grants that we are awarded. One will provide, operating support for our Purple Line BRT, Washington Western, which is slated to begin late in 23, early 24. So that will provide money for operations actually for about the first 2 years. The second project, also a competitive grant, is new software that will help us do a better job on our route planning. Frankly, some of the things that you just heard about, ways to be a little bit more efficient and more effective in our coverage to address. I'm not quite sure where that 48-minute ride came from in Winslow County, but we could address that. That's probably a 3C ride. But the route planning software will help us with that. So it's new money that's coming into the authority for competitive grants.
Great. So,
Exactly.
That's right.
Oh, it's there, okay.
Sandy, are we going to take the two CDTA ones first and then hand it to Pat for the DOT ones?
We'll need a motion to approve the TIP amendments for CDTA as presented. Is that you, Andrew? Andrew Pressure, okay. Second?
Second.
Edward? Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Yeah, I just wanted to
Sorry.
bring up what I had talked about before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, before we.
Is there a discussion opportunity there, Kathy?
Oh, absolutely.
So just speaking on behalf of Saratoga County, with some of the amendments that were made, it seemed to be a little heavy on the Saratoga County side of things. I talked to Sandy, Greg, and Bob before the meeting, but for the benefit of my colleagues here from Saratoga County and people at the county that are concerned about these projects and the proposed funding through the TIP, just want to ask a couple of questions about this. It really relates to the fact that it seems as though it was kind of heavy on the Saratoga County side of things as far as changes in timeframes. There's 3 Saratoga County projects, one from Saratoga Springs and one from the town of Wilton. So maybe you could just talk about what you had discussed with me prior to the meeting, and that'll hopefully shed some light on it for everybody here.
Sandy, could maybe want a little background about even what he's talking about,
So
internal exercise.
for the new TIP, the 2022-2027 TIP we'll be getting into. We did have to do a budget rebalancing for fiscal constraint. One of the requirements in the Federal Highway Administration is that we need to be balanced by budget year. We were out of balance, and when we looked at the range of projects available and sponsors that had numerous projects, we tried to, as best we could, shift some of the projects into some of the outer years, with the understanding that if it's in the, there's always the opportunity if a project progresses through design, and you can bring those projects in to the 4-year period without amendment. For the 5th year, you would need an amendment to bring it in, but it's more of a budgetary exercise.
I mean, we would view it, there is a little bit of discussion with the sponsors, but it's primarily a checkbook balancing exercise to make sure that we're fiscally constrained within each of those years. The commitment's already been made to the family of projects here, and we've never had an instance where if the sponsor wanted to accelerate a project into the current year, that they haven't been able to do it. But at least for purposes of how much the allocation is in a particular fund source in a given year, we need to at least show the project spread out. Yeah, but they're not necessarily directly tied to the progression of where a project is. And I think at the planning committee, we had a couple of discussions. I think there were Saratoga County projects that we did not move the design pieces of them, so they could still do them up front. And then, depending on how the progression of the design phase goes, we would then adjust the construction and vice versa. Ones that currently are in year 2 may need to go out to year 3, and we would bring those other ones in. But it's an ongoing sort of thing. It's not a static exercise here. I mean, we talk about fiscal constraint every planning committee meeting, if not a policy committee. So it's an accounting thing, checkbook balancing thing, more than it is anything about the progression of those projects. The entirety of all the projects are still there on the tip, but there's always some movement to make sure there's several different colors of federal aid, as well as the state money that's mixed into these.
And just for I'm sorry.
Nope, go right ahead.
Just for clarification, so when you say it could be moved back up in the time frame, is that dependent on it being further ahead than other competing projects, or just? I mean, how does that play out? So if we accelerate these, which I expect we will, I mean, is there still a competition for the funds with the other projects that are on the tip? Does that make sense?
In my history at the table, as well as Greg said, I would say we have never, or Sandy, we have never said to a sponsor, no, you can't come forward because there's other ones that need to come forward. Theoretically, if we had 10 projects, say we've got design approval, we've got a set of plans, and we all want to go in 23, there probably would need to be a conversation, but it's never worked out. The reality never comes together.
I don't know. You have
I'm
any
just curious
questions, Tom, or
what
Mark?
project?
Can I just have a point of order here? Because I'm a little confused. I'm sorry, I'm not in the room. I thought that we were voting on the 2 amendments to the CDTA tip for the 2019, 2024 tip amendments A and B. And it's not clear to me what we're talking about now. The motion was for the tip amendments A and B, amending the 2019, 2024 tip for 2 CDTA projects. I don't believe that anything else was called to a vote. So I just want to make sure I understand what we're talking about here.
Yeah, we did jump around a little bit, Mayor. We could, if you guys don't mind, when we get to the 2022 tip, we'll circle back to this.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I was kind of wandering out here.
Just didn't want to miss it, Carl.
Yep.
Yeah, because these are 2 competitive grants that we pursue on our own. They have, I think, absolutely nothing to do
They don't have anything to
with
do
this
with it.
discussion.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Yep.
So-
Sorry, Mayor.
So we have a motion and a second on the 2 CDTA tip amendments to the 2019, 2024 tip. And I guess I'm going to call for a vote. So all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. And then the next thing on the agenda are amendments C through M as in Mary to the 2019, 2024 tip that are being proposed by the New York State Department of Transportation. So I think maybe that if that's what is being talked about, it would be helpful to maybe identify which amendments are the ones that are that we're talking through here.
Yeah, I like to suggest that we come back to the points that Phil raised. When we get to the next agenda item, the amendments being proposed by NISDOT in this group relate to the award of the TAP Cmac program funding. So we'll have Greg talk about that.
So yeah, the items C through M, the remaining tip amendments on the table today are all the TAP Cmac Awards that were recently announced. To assist all the locals in getting them on the tip, we put together one tip letter to help all the sponsors get their projects here in one fell swoop in the interest of efficiency. So each of the listed projects is awarded from that competitive solicitation. Each one has a description. Wasn't going to go through all of them in the interest of time. Are there any questions on any of these projects?
And I'm scrolling through them for the audience, and you see the titles as we go along.
Again, these would be additional funds. These are not competing against the core tip program. These would be an addition. Once again, the region did very well for statewide.
Yeah, and that's a great point. We think we achieved receiving about 20% of the statewide allocation of just the TAP funding.
Correct.
So think about that. That's us competing against New York City. So that's an outstanding performance for our region. It's a credit to the work we do collectively, you folks locally, the support we give, the support that the DOT gives to a lot of these trail, bicycle, pedestrian, transit projects. So, you know, we congratulate everybody. That was a really big achievement.
By formula, region one usually receives 11-12% of formula funding, so to win 20% of solicitation is a good success.
So with that, Mayor, we just need the motion.
Okay, so I didn't hear anybody having any questions about any of the amendments C through M. So I'd like a motion to approve those amendments.
Order.
Any further
Just walk.
discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Carried. Okay. So Sandy, now I'm going to turn it over to you for the 2022-27 tip. I know there's been a lot of anticipation around this, and if you could walk us through that, and we could have a conversation about that, and action is anticipated at this meeting.
Sure. So we do have a very brief PowerPoint, just giving a high level overview of what we've accomplished over the last year. And oops, let me get this set up properly. And I'm going to be turning the initial conversation part of the presentation over to Jacob Beeman. You know, as I said, this represents over a year's worth of effort to put this document together, develop the capital program, and we're approving today over $550 million worth of federal aid projects. So I'll run the slides, and Jacob, go right ahead.
Thank you. So Sandy mentioned, we've got a quick presentation here to just kind of talk about how we got to the point we are at today, and really kind of the big pieces of what we're going to be asking for approval. So just a quick summary of right how we got to the kind of finish line here. Almost a year ago, on September 10th, 2021, we released our solicitation for new TIP candidate projects. Those applications were due on December 3rd, 2021, and we received 93 new candidate project applications with a total ask of about $430 million. From December to January, Cdtc staff reviewed those project applications and ultimately developed our project fact sheets and did our benefit costs and merit evaluations to provide to the planning committee to help program those projects. January through May, planning committee met a number of times to discuss and ultimately program new TIP funding. I think they met 5 times in total where actual project planning was discussed. And May 18th was the final planning committee meeting where the final list of projects was recommended to go to the policy board. June 23rd, this group, the policy board, approved our draft TIP to be released for public review and consultation. And then from that point to early August, we completed a number of different public involvement opportunities that we're going to discuss a little later on. So then on August 23rd, our planning committee met again and then recommended that final draft TIP to the policy board for approval today. And then here we are today, and we'll be requesting action on final approval of our 2022 to 27 tip. Next slide. So just a high level funding summary. We had 47 new site-specific projects programmed with a total value of approximately 191 million. Those new projects were made up of 17 different local sponsors. So we really tried to spread the funding around to our locals. On the right-hand side, one of the big takeaways from our pie chart here, and again, remembering that this is just the new individual project funding. If we take a look at the first four big pieces, which is bridge preservation, pavement preservation, bridge beyond preservation, and pavement beyond preservation, that makes up about 85% of new funding program to bridge and pavement preservation projects. So really, the majority of our new projects went towards preserving existing bridge and pavement infrastructure. Next slide. So all of those new projects, more information can be found on our interactive tip map online. There's also, it will be updated to include all projects on the new tip. More information on all tip projects can also be found in the tip document, and more specifically in the tip listings, which will highlight every project and total cost, and also breakdown of cost by year and federal fund source as well. Next slide. So the first chart we were looking at was, again, just the new projects. But as most of you all know, we have there's kind of many pieces to the tip. So when we roll in our existing projects that haven't been obligated on the current tip, we also have a large number of regional set-asides and multi-site projects, as well as our transit funding that gets rolled in. So when we bring all of that together, as Sandy mentioned, we're about $550 million total, federal, state, and local dollars. When we break that down by county, a large majority of that is regional projects. About a quarter is programmed in Albany County, and then the remainder is about 10% in Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties. On the right-hand side, again, it's that breakdown of project type. So right in the first pie chart, when we were looking at new projects, those bridge and pavement preservation was about 85% of new funding. When we're looking at it in the big picture, about a quarter of the funding is transit, and then 56% is pavement and bridge preservation and beyond preservation. So still a large majority of funding going towards maintaining existing infrastructure. Next slide. So that's kind of the tip document and the funding itself. Another big piece that we're going to be asking for approval today is our air quality conformity document. So this has kind of been being updated in parallel with the tip. When we update the tip, it triggers the need for a new area-wide conformity. And that's really done to ensure that all the new projects aren't adversely impacting air quality in the region. And it brings us into compliance with the Federal Clean Air Act. Next slide. So up to this point for air quality, we've, again, really kind of followed the same timeline as the tip. There was quite a bit of time that gets put into determining whether all the new projects are exempt or non-exempt. All of our new projects are considered air quality exempt, which means that kind of no further work needs to be done to prove that they don't have an adverse impact to air quality. There's quite a bit of consultation that goes back and forth with our interagency consultation group. And that's really to kind of agree on all of those exempt codes. Then we have the document itself, which needs to be updated, and then coordination with Adirondack Glens Falls NPO, as well as DOT, to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page. There's another review of that draft report, and then that as well goes through a public review process that kind of mirrors the tip. So after the public review, there's another revision and another kind of draft made from there, and then that brings us to where we are today. We're gonna request adoption of that final air quality document, and that's included in the tip as Appendix K. Once there's approval here, it will go to Federal Highway and Federal Transit, which that approval is expected in October. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Stephen, who I think is on online, to kind of go into a little bit more detail on what we did for our public involvement process. And that's really kind of the big piece that we've been working on since the last time that we met here. Stephen?
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Hi, everyone. Yes, we've just completed a pretty impressive public involvement process. Excuse me, in especially with looking at a lot of our peers, I think we are doing a pretty exceptional job of trying to make the TIP document and the TIP process as understandable and as transparent to the public as we possibly can. There's always room for improvement, but as you see here, we've employed a wide range of strategies and technologies to reach as many folks as we could, to try to make these set of projects come to life, and to make it as digestible as we can, and to reach as many people so that we can understand, get the public input and weigh in on the entire program, and including both web-based, in-person, and other forms of targeted outreach to specific groups. The next slide will show, sort of how well did we do? Well, we got, well over 300 hits on the website, people going and accessing that information, which is fantastic. That's our, sort of rich treasure trove of information about the TIP. We had well over 150 interactions with Cdtc staff, which I think I'm particularly proud of, because a lot of this stuff is rather, dense, but at least with having those interactions with staff at the various, especially at the pop-up events, we were able to kind of talk people through and make those connections. And honestly, for a lot of people, just introduce who we are, what is the Cdtc and what do we do. We are also, we received 28 survey responses to our feedback portal, as well as 7 other comments from various other sources outside of the survey itself, email and so forth. So on the next slide, part of the survey was basically mimicking the exercise that the planning committee did, setting those targets for setting funding targets for each of the project types. So you can see that, in the sort of the orange color is the public input, how they responded to this exercise. And you can see that there's a difference of different priorities of where folks decided that they wanted to see the bulk of the funding going to. And I will note that there are some complications with this, especially because I think a lot of folks saw the project categories as a little bit opaque and exactly what components go into, what kind of project goes into what sort of project category. So I think that was a little bit of a source of confusion. And I should also note, this is the result of the 28 responses. So, these are the folks who decided to come and give us input. And that, and I think that it's still important that we understand that that there is a little bit of a disconnect on where the public saw where those funding targets should go. And then finally, on the last slide, I just wanted to give everybody a little bit of a flavor of the comments that were received, that reflected some of the common themes that we found throughout the comments. Specifically interest in more biking and pedestrian infrastructure, and specifically safety as it applies to biking and pedestrians. And in addition, just a little bit more desire to see a more comprehensive plan. I think again, speaks to both the the material the actual like decisions made is, but also in our communication of how the processes work, and how and the various plans that are involved. And with that, I think that will cover the public involvement section. I'll turn it over to Sandy.
So I'll be bringing this home, to kind of finish up. We received, as Stephen mentioned, a number of comments. In terms of specific projects, we received comments on 7 specific projects, but, I had a little exercise in my own head of what project is going to generate the most interest. I thought it would be 787. It ended up being Central Avenue, and not just the Central Avenue project in the city of Albany, but the whole of Central Avenue. And we got several comments with the same theme about Central Avenue, which is improving the pedestrian environment, and public safety. So it was interesting to see the range of comments that came in on Central Avenue. But you can also see we got positive feedback, on a lot of these projects. Most folks wanted to know, when are things starting? Have you thought about pieces of these projects? The Federal Street project was one where some concerns were raised about roundabouts, but that project has yet to be designed. So, we responded to all of these specific comments. We shared brief comments that we generated with either the project sponsor or the staff member assigned to the project. And then, we obviously are including these in the TIP document. The other thing we accomplished is our consultation. This is another federal requirement, but we reached out to the tribal nations and federal landholders in the region. The tribal nations, if you're not aware, while we don't have territories in our immediate 4-county area, our whole region is archaeologically and culturally significant to many of the major tribal nations. And we have 3 in particular: the St. Regis tribe, which is based right now up in northern New York. The tribe that's the Mohican tribe that's based now out of both Wisconsin and Massachusetts, and then the Delaware tribe, which is based out of Oklahoma. I was able to make contact with the leaders of the nations because what their objective is they want to know about these projects at the point that they can mobilize their resources to be aware and on top of when shovels go in the ground, so that if there are important artifacts or cultural resources that they have a historic interest in, that they have someone representing their nation on the ground in part of the process. So we're pleased to reach out to and have made contact with all 3 nations, and looking forward to having ongoing conversations with them. Similarly with the federal landholders, which in our region are the Waterloo Arsenal, what's referred to as the National Laboratory up in the town of Milton. For those locally, it's often referred to as the Kesselring site, and the Saratoga National Historic Park. So I've also made contacts with all of those entities to coordinate this effort. And the final sort of administrative piece to all of this is we have to, when we adopt a new TIP, we have to self-certify Cdtc's planning process. This, again, it's just required for the New York State STIP development. The documentation for our self-certification is contained in Appendix J of the document. And the basic things that the documentation has us look at are we meeting all of our basic federal requirements? Are we doing a good job on our planning and technical work? And is our administration and management of our grants up to par? And so that document addresses that. So our next steps, just to wrap up, obviously today we're going to approve resolutions for all 3 of these important elements. Once the TIP is approved, we expect we'll be passing on to the state, obviously, for incorporation in the statewide TIP. The state is still moving through its process. We anticipate a mid-November finalization of the STIP. I believe the date right now is November 15th, which, as you guys know, is a little later than normal, but the gap isn't too large. So hopefully it won't affect any of the projects in terms of obligations. And that is it. So with that, we can return to the conversation Phil started, which you're totally fine, Phil. And I think, Mark, you were about to make some additional remarks.
Yeah, and I forgot much where it was to be.
I'm
honest.
sorry.
My main concern, the main question was, are these changes that Bill is referring to, are they since the May 18th meeting that we had when we pretty much had the draft? So these are additional changes since then.
Correct.
Okay. How recent have the changes been?
Everything was approved at our August planning committee meeting. So the schedule was, the new schedule that Phil's referring to has been out there since that meeting.
Okay.
So the project selection meeting, we programmed a total number, but in that meeting, it's too chaotic to figure out what year everyone originally requested.
Mhm.
And of course, everyone requested through.
Right away, of course.
And so there's always in the tip process, we pick the family of projects, and then we do this shuffle. Spread it out. And then once the tip is live, there are a ton more moved, projects move out, projects move in, and it's just by natural gravity.
But the first
Balance.
And the first component of that is the 50 million plus of jobs that carried over from the current tip into the new one. So the idea that every new project wanted to be in year one and year two, you've already got this family of projects that are by design and approval here that is brought in. So not that they're first in line, but they should be closer to a set of plans and being able to go out. So that, I mean, that's sort of the reason that everything needs to get moved around in there for that sort of exercise. But I thought it was very good discussion at the planning committee that if some of these, if somebody's really anxious to get going on something, that's why it's important to have design money assigned to that in year one. But you still don't know how, the environmental process is going to play out for that particular project where, and maybe year two would be a stretch, but year three is probably a real possibility for some of those that are even in 4 and 5. I mean, notice some of them, and there's several DOT projects that are also for that same purposes that get put out there. It's not done like Greg said, we want the discussion to be project focused when we're doing the selection and not so much worry about balancing the colors of which eligibility a particular project has. We sort of fit them all into the chart for the 5 years of the tip. But I said, it really doesn't affect the project schedules. If something's ready to go, there's not a history at this table of something needing to be put off because it wasn't. There's always been another candidate that is going to move out, and at least twice a year, wholesale sort of movings around because of whatever federal obligation, knowing what actually the amount of dollars that we have in a given year. So it's not static. It's a very dynamic sort of thing.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to pass on an acknowledgement. I spoke with the county planning department. Mike Valentine, who serves on the planning committee. He was fairly pleased overall with the tip. He said it was good collaboration amongst the towns with DOT, and he was particularly appreciative of the county board of supervisors allocating some of their American Rescue Plan Act funds, which allowed some further moving projects up, at least for design. And he was particularly happy about the Zim Smith Trail getting funded. On the other hand, I have another comment. I just thought the pie chart that showed where the funds were going by county. It'd be interesting to see another pie chart that shows population and another pie chart that shows local road mileage and possibly one number of bridges or that type of thing, just to see from an overall perspective, we're getting an equitable distribution of funds given constraints and everything we're working with trying to achieve.
Are you suggesting you want those in the document? now or?
No, not
For
now,
future
but just
reference.
future reference, yes.
Yeah, we'll definitely take that into consideration. Thank you. Any other comments in the room?
Did glance at the family social programs, only one of them did get shifted to year 5, which is that's the only that will require a committee action to bring it forward. Ready?
That's the Point Grove, Kendra.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
I believe so. Right, there was 3 that we had construction moved into the 5th year, but to balance it, we moved design into the 1st year so that the project can still kick off essentially immediately. And then when design is complete, construction will be brought in.
Well, maybe I can talk to you offline about that, opposed to taking up everybody's time, just to make sure I know which project you're talking about, of the ones that were moved.
Okay.
Yep. Thank you. And thank you, Cindy, Bob and Woody.
Absolutely. One final note, before we move into taking some actions. We did post today the final version of Appendix D, which includes all the responses to the comments we received. So if you want to take a look at that, that's available on our website. And that's been the only change to the draft HIP document since it was posted for this meeting last week. So you're welcome to take a look at those. I don't think you'll be surprised by anything that's there. And with that, I think we can move into the motions.
Thanks, Sandy. So I want to take these one at a time. So let's start with the resolution 22-3, which is a resolution to adopt the Transportation Improvement Program revised Appendix D. And just so I'm clear, that's the appendix that has the projects that will be funded in the 22-27 tip, correct, Sandy?
That's correct.
Okay. So may I have a motion? Charles?
Motion. We got Carr made the motion, Chris second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. The second resolution is resolution 22-4, which is the Albany, Schenectady, Troy 1997 8-hour ozone non-attainment area transportation air quality conformity determination. Do I have a motion to approve that?
Motion.
At Barnes,
Second,
at Jordan.
any discussion, questions? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That
We have
motion
a-
carried.
Oh,
What?
Sorry,
After,
I'm sorry.
I just
Councilman.
wanted to make sure that the revised appendix D was part of 22-3 when we.
Yes, yep, we're all set. Sorry, Kathy, you can continue.
Okay. So that motion carries. Resolution 22-5 is the self-certification of the MPO process. Do I have a motion to self-certify?
Warner, and
Okay.
seconded by Andrew.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, great. Thank you all. Thank you for the hard work. I know this was a drawn out tip process. It took a little longer and was a little more animated than we probably originally anticipated, but great job, everyone. Okay, now we are moving on to I believe, item 8 on our agenda, which is the Unified Planning Work Program solicitation. Sandy, UPWP.
Okay, thanks, Kathy. So in the e-packet, as we're now referring to it, we prepared a brief summary of what we're planning for our upcoming Unified Planning Work Program solicitation. This is hopefully where it's going to be a little less bureaucratic and a little more interesting from a planning perspective. So basically, we every year, and we started this last year, but we plan to do this annually. We will be asking and seeking for planning project ideas from our partners, our local government members, regional entities, on a wide variety of transportation planning initiatives covering the period from April 1st of 2023 through March 30th of 2024. So basically next year. We start this process now because it takes some time, as with all of these things, to build these programs. But with the bipartisan infrastructure law, we estimate that we will have about $1 million in federal planning funds available through this solicitation. And what we're proposing to do is work with the planning committee in October to develop and finalize the solicitation, which would be issued in October for a wide range of planning activities. And a few are listed here, ranging from corridor studies. We've gotten more and more requests about traffic signal and operational studies on corridors. So that seems to be a growing area of concern. Obviously, we've gotten a lot of input on bike and ped safety, curbside management plans, transit-oriented development, crash data analysis. So all of these are just examples of initiatives that folks locally can apply for. Our proposed schedule would be, we would work with the planning committee to issue the solicitation in October with a November 23rd deadline, giving us here internally a month or so to work on developing some recommendations for the planning committee's consideration in January, with a full draft plan developed for February, then having some public review period, and then coming back to the policy board in March for approval of that document. So what we're asking for today is your authorization to approve this approach to work with the planning committee on build of the UPW.
Danny, the reason you're calling it a draft in February is because it's a draft until it's approved.
Correct. Yep. Any questions about the approach? Okay, we're not getting any questions here.
Okay, so, and you want a motion on this, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so, do I have a motion to proceed, with the, UPWP solicitation process as outlined, at this meeting?
Still there?
Second,
Yes.
any further discussion or questions? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Carried. Okay, Sandy, you're gonna give us an overview of all of the money that's out there for us.
I couldn't possibly do this justice in the timeframes we have here, but I did want to just highlight for you folks. There's been, information is coming out hourly seemingly on all of these federal grant programs. And I know it's a very confusing process. There's a lot of information being thrown at you. I did just want to note that we had developed a resource on our website containing a lot of information about the bipartisan infrastructure law, some guidance documents that are available. You can actually see the apportionments under the law by state, for fiscal year 2022. And we also have the laundry list of grant opportunities ranging from the Bridge Investment Program, for which applications on the large bridge are due September 8th. Another program I'll point out is Reconnecting Communities pilot program. There's been a lot of interest in this as it relates to 787. We're not applying for a grant in this program, but applications are due in this program October 13th. A very popular program is the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. Applications are due September 15th. We also have an upcoming opportunity called the Strengthening Mobility and Revolutionizing Transportation, or the SMART Grants program. This notice of funding opportunity is expected to open sometime in the month of September. But this one ties in well with our smart mobility toolbox that's in development. If you're not sure of what types of projects might be eligible, take a look at this draft document that we're hoping to finalize this fall, because it'll give you some ideas of the kinds of technology-driven projects that are going to be eligible for this SMART program. I did kind of jump over one thing with I want to go back to the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. One question that's been coming up is, if you don't have a regional plan or a local safety plan in place, can you still qualify for capital funds versus the planning funds in this program? We've made the case that yes, our regional local road safety action plan does get you most of the way there. So we have put together a self-certification checklist on our website. So if your community is thinking about applying for implementation funds, use this checklist. It has to be part of your application anyway. The planning fund side, we recognize that our plan is incomplete in some areas. We are going to apply for grants to go after planning funds to beef up our existing plan. If we don't get an award through this program, we'll likely bring it back in the Unified Planning Work Program update, because this is important. One of the key pieces of this is bringing in the state roads to the local road data, crash data, and doing a regional analysis, and also establishing a Vision Zero policy for our safety planning here at Cdtc. So all those resources are available on this webpage. In addition, we have some upcoming formula programs. The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program is one of the requirements of that is the state has to develop a infrastructure, basically a NEVI plan. And that NEVI plan is out for public review right now. There's a link to that document on our website. That'll give you a sense of where New York State is looking to develop. It's been described to me as a work in progress. This is sort of the first step because the timeframes were very tight to develop this plan. But we encourage you to take a look at that. It'll give you a sense of the eligibility. And we anticipate some kind of funding program to come out of that effort once that plan is approved. The other formula-based programs that are bringing some money to the region is this carbon reduction program. And I think the best way to describe this is it's sort of an additional type of transportation alternatives program funding, but it really is intended to reduce carbon and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it's funding the types of work that would be done under the Cmac program or the TAP program. The interesting thing for the MPO here at Cdtc is that by law, there has to be some allocation directed to the MPO based on population. And for us, there's an estimated about $5 to $6 million that will be coming to the Cdtc table to program. It's not a lot of money, and we don't know yet how the state's approaching this. They have to develop a carbon reduction strategy for New York State, but we will have some opportunity to program something. What that something is, we'll have to figure out. And then there's a lot of information. If you want more information about the carbon program, there's 2 upcoming webinars that might be of interest to folks or your staff. And then the final program, which is still sort of in its infancy of development, is the Protect Formula program. There's some initial guidance and a fact sheet available on that, but that's really getting into your coastal resiliency, hardening of infrastructure from flooding kinds of projects. And we anticipate there being some money available statewide for projects in this area. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. The other piece of this, aside from the bipartisan infrastructure law, is the recent enactment of the Inflation Reduction Act, which, as I mentioned earlier, did create a new fund source for some neighborhood-oriented transportation improvement projects. Something in the neighborhood of $140 billion nationwide. So we're going to be watching that, or sorry, not 145 billion, 1.2 billion nationwide. And we'll be watching that one as more information comes out to see how that might impact the MPO. But that is all to say, you know, we're here to help you folks with applications. We have data resources. We can help review text, you know, that you might be submitting in your application, offer letters of support, what have you, to we really want to help folks access these discretionary grant programs. And we're here to do as much as we can to help us. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I will stop there.
Thanks, Sandy. Any questions? Great. You know, I do encourage our members, you know, one of the benefits that we get from this is the technical assistance from the staff here. So as you're looking at projects, and if you have any questions, it's not only knowing the programs themselves, but in many cases, the individuals who are going to be scoring the applications and understanding what the priorities are, particularly of those in the administration that is going to be making these determinations going forward. So thank you, Sandy, and thanks to the entire staff for staying on top of this and helping us through the alphabet soup of all of the various programs that are out there. So without any additional questions, let's go through the status of planning activities. Did you have anything else to update us on with Cdtc, Sandy?
Yeah, just in the interest of time, I'll just mention two quick things. I just wanted to remind everyone that we're seeking applications for ADA transition planning support from local governments. The application deadline is September 30th. If you have any questions about that, please reach out to me. Carrie Ward is managing that program for us. We also have out right now, we're in the midst of completing the Trim Creek Greenway Trail Plan. It's just about complete now. And also the Smart Communities Toolbox that I mentioned earlier should be completed this fall. And one final thing I'll mention is this Go Easy app. We've partnered with Federal Highway on a smartphone rewards program. And the whole idea of this program is to encourage folks to try different modes of transportation, and through offering incentives, what it takes to kind of sway someone's decision making when it comes to their commute to work. So I'll be sending everybody on our policy board some information about this. We're tracking and trying to get as many folks in the region to sign up for this program through the end of the month. But if you would be willing to share this on social media, we have some canned information for you to help spread the word about this opportunity. So those two things, a couple of things are going on. Yeah, and I guess we'll stop there in the interest of time. You are muted there, Shan.
Mark, you're up for CDRPC, I presume?
You presume correctly, Mayor. Thank you. Big thing, we're resuming our in-person planning and zoning workshops October 28th at Hudson Valley Community College. We plan to have a plenary session on regulating recreational marijuana. So be there or be square, as it were. And in the interest of time, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. All right, Carms, any other updates on CDTA?
Just one, you may have followed, we, for the first time in our history, expanded to a 5th county. We're now operating in Montgomery County. That was effective this past Sunday. It's great to be cheered. It's amazing how people who had nothing and now have something are beside themselves happy. So lots of work to get us there, but nice to be expanding west.
When do you take delivery on all the new electric buses?
Well, we have 4 new ones that just came in. That's 8. We have no others on order.
Didn't you just get a large grant though for?
We got a large grant, 24.5 million, but that's actually 25. That's for a dozen buses, but mainly the infrastructure needed to charge them. So that has to come first before the buses. Right now, there ain't no juice.
Did you get a 25% raise for getting?
I got 0.
We'll work on it.
Thanks. Nice to have a fan. That's it for me, Mayor.
Thanks, Carm. Congratulations on the expansion. Now we'll turn it over to DOT.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. We're still designing and letting projects, and we're still seeing the effects of inflation and supply chain issues. Projects are still coming in pretty high, but we had 2 awarded since last time we were here. And both those projects, I believe, have started or will be starting shortly. One is improving the ramps at the Spooey at exit 6, having a little bit longer acceleration lanes there, and we're going to be paving Route 4 in Mechanicville finally. And Sandy mentioned something about a lot of interest in signals and technology. The department is going away from having the loops in the pavement and going to high-tech camera detection on our signals. So that will save us money in the long run when we pave these roads and we're not digging up the loops. I don't think we've had any real personnel changes since the last time, right? So people are leaving, but yeah. Well, Mayor, I guess that's the end of my report. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Pat. And I didn't, I'm Phil from New York State Transit Authority. Are you in the room?
I am, thank you, Mayor.
Oh, there you are. Okay, now I can see you.
The only real significant thing for the thruway, I'll just kind of, status quo, we're still struggling with influx in pricing of material and stuff for our programs as well. The only thing I want to share is if you go west on the thruway, the Iroquois service area, new Iroquois service area is actually open. So if you're interested in Popeye's chicken, get on the way west. The other ones are taking their time because of all the other problems we're having with supply chain issues. We are behind schedule almost all of them. Coming soon. That's it, man. Thank you.
Well, Phil, you're in good company, if that's any comfort.
Yes.
We're all delayed. Did Steve arrive?
He did not. He
Okay.
Friday. He didn't want to be acknowledged.
All right. Well, absent anyone there from the airport, let's move to the Albany Port District Commission. Pat?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I'll add on to everybody's that we're still behind schedule on ours, mostly because of federal government. I don't know if anybody saw Spectrum News from last night. We had a pretty extensive port board meeting yesterday. A lot of discussion, a lot of authorizations, and as always, the media can't quite get it right. They said that we have 1 permit issued from DEC. We actually have multiple permits issued from DEC. Department of State has issued permits. DOT has issued permits. We have some federal permits. We probably have 15 permits in place. We're just waiting on some important ones from the Army Corps, and they are working diligently. But unfortunately, that means our major project is on hold. What I told the planning committee last month is, since that's on hold, the board instructed the rest of us to shift gears and work on other things. So our board yesterday authorized us to move forward with a leasehold acquisition in the city of Rensselaer for an over 40-acre site that we are going to hopefully have a build out on for more offshore wind abilities, with a new tenant that would build on that site. A 40-acre expansion of the port, in addition to our 80-acre expansion, would be about a third of a larger port than when I started there 6 years ago. So it's a few years of very significant expansion. I can't name the company we're talking to yet, but hopefully at our next meeting we'll be further down the road and I can get further into that. Prior to this meeting, I was a few minutes late because I just left our partners from Canada and from Norway. We're in this afternoon to discuss our project, and our developers have also added on to what DOT and Authority said, that our estimates, even from December, are now growing by 30% and some 40% on certain aspects. And luckily, some of these companies have enough where they didn't blink because they're seeing it in every state that they're developing in, and no one said, put your pencils down, so. Everybody around the table I know is just struggling because it doesn't make any sense. We had engineers last year saying it can't possibly keep going. And you should expect a downturn this year, so to have another 30% is just crazy. Good news, I know I'm going longer than I probably should. We have evened out with last year on our vessel traffic. We were in a little bit of a downturn last quarter. We've evened out. We've had a good summer. Longshore hours are still up from this time last year and on trend to surpass last year. And last year's longshore hours were really up. So that means our stevedores, men and women, are working diligently. And if anything, we're in a shortage of workers for how much work is coming in. We've had a good amount of GE outbound traffic the last month or two, and our stevedore and our internal staff has secured or is in the process of securing some new steel imports into the state that we're very excited about, that hopefully I can share a little more on at our next meeting. I will stop there. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Pat. Any questions for Pat? All right. Any other regional local planning activities that we need to discuss?
Mayor, I just want to announce that Saratoga County has announced their 2023 Planning and Zoning Conference. It'll be February 1st at the Civic Center in Saratoga Springs. It's probably one of the largest type conferences in the state, and it meets the mandatory New York State requirement for being educated for planning board members, zoning board members, and it's a well-done conference.
Very good. All right. Any other business? All right, hearing none, we have on our agenda the upcoming meetings and events. I look forward to everyone's active participation, and absent any further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Andrew and Carr.
All right. Any objections? All right, thanks, everyone. Good to see you all.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
You wanted to do that?
Yeah.